I had no clue what my new job would entail as the elevator descended beyond the facility's third basement. I suppose the secrecy with which the interview process had been conducted should have raised a few red flags, but I needed the money, so I hadn't asked questions. Even after I'd completed all the necessary background checks and ended my security clearance, they still hadn't told me exactly what I'd be doing or where I'd be working. They'd be pissed if they knew I was sharing this information now. That is, if they were still alive. That morning, a van had picked me up at my house and had driven me to an unknown location somewhere outside of town. I was in the back, sitting with my hands on my lap, trying to see through the heavily tinted windows of my cabin. It had been so dark that when the doors finally swung open a few hours later, the sunlight stung my eyes. We were in the woods, and I was standing in a covered parking lot. Above was a net woven from climbing vines with a few poles and a metal mesh to support the weight. Past the lot was a building painted brown and green. From a distance, it blended almost seamlessly against the forest backdrop, but for a single set of sliding doors near the center of it. As I stepped closer, I looked at it in awe. I found a similar bed of vines poking out from its roof. I imagine this place must have been nearly invisible from the air. My driver, an armed guard I hadn't realized was armed until he stepped out of the vehicle, took my luggage and whipped his head towards the front door as a sign for me to go. I was supposed to stay in that facility day and night for 2 months, but I barely lasted 2 hours. It was a gentle-looking woman who greeted me in the lobby, and her kind eyes temporarily eased my swells of anxiety. She was wearing a lab coat with a name tag that read Addison Sparrow. She handed me an access card with a photo I couldn't recall taking. "Welcome, welcome," she said, her bright red lips curling into a broad smile. "I'm Dr. Addison. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Please, right this way." Her voice was soft, and her words came out smooth, with each syllable meticulously attaching to the other like elegant cursive scrawl. She led me to the elevators and pushed the button labeled 9. To my surprise, I felt us going down. We were headed to sub-level 9. 9, and that wasn't even as low as the numbers went. It was around level 5 that I started hearing something strange. There was a distant, garbled yelling that only became louder as we descended farther and farther down. It seemed like nonsense at first, but as the elevator finally came to a stop and the doors parted, the voice thundered into my ears and I began to recognize order in the disorder. I didn't recognize the language. It sounded ancient, maybe Latin, but with deep, growly bellows of German. Addison Sparrow seemed unfazed by the enraged calls coming from the far end of the hall. She led me to a door marked Insect Storage Room. "You'll be working in here," she told me. I reached for the doorknob, and the screams became louder and even more aggressive. She grabbed my hand to stop me. "Hold on, it's almost time. I don't want to miss this." Her eyes sparkled with childlike glee. We continued down the hall and towards the source of the deafening babbling. Addison swiped her key card and unlocked the set of hospital doors leading to a massive room that must have taken up the height of 2 floors. Indeed, there was a grated, fenced path circling the 4 walls at the height the second floor would have been, and researchers were walking in and out, taking notes and lugging around unknown equipment, observing what was happening on my level. And what I saw in the middle of the room was what finally cemented the realization I'd bitten off far more than I could chew. The source of the screams, and the fuel of many nightmares to come, was a head. A massive head, about the height of 2 grown men standing on top of one another. While it was distinctly humanoid, there was Nothing human about its clammy, bluish skin or the 2 rows of black bumps protruding from its bald scalp. There was nothing natural about its piss-yellow eyes, full of brown stains, or its strange square irises that darted from one researcher to the other, lingering on each, just long enough to make me wonder if it was trying to burn their faces into its memory. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what happened to the rest of its body. I can't wrap my head around where something of that gargantuan size could have hidden unnoticed on Earth for however long it existed before it was taken here, or who might have beheaded it. It screamed its strange unknown language through gritted bark-like teeth, at times even smiling and letting out cruel bellowing laughter. Even though I couldn't understand what I was saying, I somehow knew it was happening, and it was not so silently both cursing and mocking us all. It would snap its teeth at anyone who dared to walk too close, and whip its head, or at least whip it as much as its limited range of movement would allow, towards others to unsettle them. Faced with its fate, it chose defiance. It chose to etch a portrait of horror into the hearts of everyone that dared to contribute to its downfall. Its intimidation tactics didn't seem to work on Addison, who grinned in amazement at the colossal head, but I could see other researchers growing more and more anxious. Addison nudged me. "It's about to start. Watch this." She looked at me, pushing a lock of shoulder-length curly blonde hair out of her face. She seemed to want me to share her enthusiasm, but I was shocked and horrified. They set up a ladder on the left of the giant's head. A researcher climbed it, but the head twitched, and he fell and crawled away screaming. Addison tutted. "Some people," she mumbled disapprovingly. Another scientist took his place, and 2 men approached carrying a massive cylinder of some sort of yellow substance. The cylinder ended in a narrow cone, and I couldn't help but equate its shape to a syringe. They carefully hauled it up to the scientist on the ladder. The bestial head let out a string of incomprehensible words. The tone, however, was unmistakable. It was a taunt, a dark and angry taunt, one that seemed to say, "Try. Go ahead and try. I'll make you regret it." Now the gallery above had become crowded with researchers watching in a mix of fear, apprehension, and excitement as the cone of the cylinder was pushed into the giant's ear. It roared in protest, but without arms to swat them away, it was powerless to stop. "Begin the injection," someone ordered. I didn't see who. I couldn't look away from the scene in front of me. There was a hydraulic exhale as the syringe emptied itself straight into its ear. It howled, though it sounded more like a battle cry than pain. I watched its beach ball-sized eyes roll to the back of its skull, and its face began contorting. A hissing sound came out of it, and the acidic smell of vinegar filled the room. The acid ate its way through the giant's brain, dissolving everything in its path. Parts of the skull began to decompress and cave in like an old jack-o'-lantern a week after Halloween. Its lips curled and puckered in involuntary muscle spasms, which spread to the rest of its face. Its hairless eyebrows arched up and down, its cheeks twitched, and its eyelids fluttered. A pink soapy liquid bubbled out of its nose and ears and singed its skin as it traced along its magnified facial features. Finally, its movement stopped, and the head was silent. The room came to life with roars of excitement. Addison joined her colleagues, giving hugs and high fives and pats on the back. I think I was the only one still looking at the felled creature. As they were cheering and celebrating their victory, my eyes were locked on the colossal head, and I saw its disgusting yellow eyes whip back to the front, with anger and vengeance burning in its square pinprick irises. An involuntary muscle movement, maybe. I didn't stick around to find out. As though in a haze, I doubled back around to the elevators and walked out of the building. No one seemed to notice me as I did. I walked down a path in the woods just large enough for a car to go through, and eventually came upon a highway. I hitchhiked home, They never called me back. I wouldn't have answered the call even if they did. I don't really know why, but I made my way back there a few weeks later. Maybe I needed to prove to myself it wasn't all a bad dream. I just needed to see the facility, only for a moment. Call it closure, I guess. I parked my car along the highway and snuck through the woods rather than drive up to the building. I was banking on not being spotted. In and out. That's it. However, when I got there, I didn't see what I expected to see. The parking lot was full of cars, but some of them had been caved in and others tossed across the yard. There was a canopy of leaves glued to their bodies as though they hadn't been moved in a while. What's more, the facility's front door had been torn off from the inside, leaving a bed of shattered glass on the front steps. My first thought, the thought I can't forget, is that the head had been reunited with its body. After all, what else would explain the deep gouges in the parking lot like fingers raking concrete as if it were dirt? What else would explain the indentation in some of those cars, shaped suspiciously like footprints? What else would explain the strange, low muttering I heard as I stood there before turning tail, getting back in my car and driving away, leaving the facility and its secrets behind? Knock. I'm at least 15 feet from the frozen shore when I hear it. The ice feels as solid as concrete, so I take another step. The Winnipeg is like most of the Minnesota ice lakes out here, which will remain frozen until spring. There's no chance of it breaking through. At least that's what my girlfriend Amy keeps telling me. Knock. I hear it cracking. We shouldn't go so far out. I hear something cracking. Is it the voice of my terrified boyfriend? I glare at her, or at least at the waddling bundle of winter coats which has devoured her without a trace. Somewhere in my head is faintly echoing the song, "I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that." I can't turn it off, but I do my best to turn down the volume so I can take another step. The thick blanket of snow which covers the ice keeps me from sliding, and if I really concentrate, I can pretend I'm walking on a regular snowy field. Knock. It's just so hard with that sound like an ephemeral gunshot deep below the ice. Reverberating echoes insidiously linger somewhere between hearing and imagination. There isn't any reason to be afraid. If I'm trembling, it's just because it's 14 degrees outside. "If you don't hurry up, I'm going to start stomping and throwing rocks," Amy shouts. "Then we'll see how solid it really is." When did she get so far ahead of me? It's amazing how quickly the world can pass when you're staring at your feet. I scramble and slide a few other shambling paces toward her. It's easier to move if I just focus on her. Don't look down, don't look down, don't look down. Knock. I look down. My body doesn't ask for permission first. I couldn't help it when the sound comes from directly below. I stare down at the blank patch of ice where the snow is thinner. I stare down into the blurred, blue-tinged face on the other side of the ice and the hand which pulls back to... But the knock doesn't come. This time the hand simply presses against the other side of the glassy window. Fingers spread wide in an intimate gesture as though inviting me to touch it from the other side. "Seriously, dude? I'm gonna freeze to death waiting for you. Amy!" My voice is muffled from my scarf, but I can't look up from the lake. The face is coming into focus as it presses itself against the ice. Amy's skin had never been so pale, her eyes never so blue as those staring up at me from below my feet. "I swear to God, if you see out, then I'm leaving your ass here. You said you'd go all the way out with me." I put my hand against the ice mirror to the girl underneath. She recoils immediately, her face twisting into that of desperate fear. Amy and I had been separated about an hour yesterday when she moved onto the advanced slopes while I practiced on the bunny hill. Had something happened to her during that time? 2. Knock. Her fist slamming into the underside of the ice, which vibrates underneath me. Then, slamming again, her movements frenzied in their urgency. Her mouth straining as the silent scream rips from her body. The muscles in my legs coil beneath me, so tense they might as well be a brooding avalanche, which needs only weight of one more snowflake to begin. 1. The voice was different. It was still Amy, but it wasn't her, like comparing a black and white photo to the original. All of the color, all of the life, all of the flavor had drained from the sound, leaving only the barest skeleton of her voice to hang out in the frozen air. "Run!" screams the girl under the ice, but I can't leave her there. I clasp my hands together to raise them above my head, smashing them into the window. It feels like the bones in my fingers are rattling together from the impact. Underneath, the girl is flinging her entire body against the side of the ice. "I'm giving up on you," shouted the colorless voice. It sounded like it was farther away, but I didn't look up. The girl below the ice is growing weaker with every strike. Her fingers are stiff and inflexible. Her mouth is still working over the same word again and again, but each iteration comes out more slowly as her jaw resists the effort. I can break through, though. A deep hollow crack is resonating with each blow. Flurries of snow and ice shrapnel explode into the air as I strike the ice again and again. The girl below is sinking now, but I'm not giving up until... Glacial waters spray from the crack. One more blow and I'm through, plunging my hand into the numbing chill to seize the stiff fingers slipping deeper into the water. The skin is so hard and cold it feels like metal, but life surges into her as she responds to my touch. She's gripping me now, and if I can just get stable footing, I'll be able to pull her out. But she pulls before I have the chance, and I'm already tumbling into Winter's gaping mouth. Water so cold that it burns my skin closes over my head. The other Amy braces her feet against the underside of the ice to pull me deeper still, launching off with her legs to send both of us spiraling downward. I can feel my eyes freezing all the way to my skull, but I can't shut them if I want any chance of finding the hole in the ice. I expect my impetus to rocket me straight out of the water, but my head only slams into the impenetrable ceiling of ice. Even down here, it sounds a lot like the knocking I've heard since I arrived. My wild fingers probe the ice as far as I can reach in every direction. I went straight down and back up. The hole should be here. My skin revolts against the numbing darkness. The pressure in my lungs is mounting by the second. My body demands a scream, but I refuse to waste the last remnants of my precious air. I'm pulling myself along the bottom of the ice in every direction, but the strength of my fingers is swiftly fleeting. The hole is gone, the light is dying, and soon I will follow. Soon, but not yet. Fingers grip around my ankle. I'm not strong enough to kick free anymore. Another hand latches on and begins to drag me, and I know in my heart that it's the hand of death. And then the pull. Water rushes over me, but I can barely feel it anymore. There's a momentary pause as the hands refocus their grip, and then the pull again, dragging me deeper still. My last uncertain thought is wondering why it's growing brighter around me instead of darker. An idle curiosity of no consequence. She's pulling again, and my legs are pierced by a sudden wind. My brain can no longer process how that's possible. Then another pull, and the water begins to pour off my body. My head is suddenly clear from the water, and I collapse onto my back on solid ground. I'm coughing and spitting up water, but a warm blanket is being wrapped around me. My eyes flutter open from the life-giving pressure, and Amy is there. Amy, in her purple sweatshirt, perfectly dry. She's holding me to her and wailing incoherently. I must have passed out after that, but when I woke up, I was back inside her house. She said I must have been crazy to break the ice under me, but she ran back as soon as she saw me fall in. I was upside down in the water, but she managed to pull me out by my ankles. What on earth were you thinking? You could have died. I didn't tell her about the face under the ice, though. I didn't ask her how she could have changed back into her purple sweatshirt in the middle of that ordeal. And above all else, I didn't ask her about the knocking. I still hear it resounding far above my head, almost as though it were coming from another world. I don't think I'm ready to find out. I just couldn't believe it. It was her. The woman of my dreams, standing just 10 feet away from the copy machine, staring at me. Me, of all people. Her hair was red and her eyes were blue. She was the true mock-up of an angel if there ever was one. She'd never noticed me before, yet here I was, minding my own business, and now she was staring at me. Some may have called her stare a disturbed and angry one, but I could tell she felt the same way about me as I did her. Sure, I may have been staring at her first, and that may be what caught her attention, but I could see the yearning in her eyes. She wanted me. For months, I had watched her from the safety of a small but quaint cubicle. I knew every detail about her life, every single one. I knew when she had lunch, who her friends were, who she talked to, who she liked and disliked, and where she would be at any given moment of the workday. I even knew where she and her husband lived, and she and I both took the same bus to work. I don't own a vehicle, and her husband took their car to his place of employment every morning. Even on the long bus ride to work, she never so much as batted an eye in my direction. But today was different. This was my chance. I smiled at her as she made a somewhat perturbed facial expression towards me. She then looked away in a seemingly disgusted motion. Love is a strange mistress. My mind was now racing with an unending plethora of emotions, coupled with large quantities of dopamine. My synapses were firing off at an alarming rate as I stood up and started walking to the copy machine. I felt such a strong need to reach out and touch her. And just before I took my final step in her direction, my boss came over and pulled her aside to discuss some work-related issues. My march was impeded, but the ever-growing desire in me remained constant. I needed to see her. Although we went to work at the same time, she always left an hour before I did, just in time to catch the last bus. I would usually have a coworker bring me home. Sometimes in the summer I would travel by bicycle. Right now, however, it was the middle of winter, and there was a storm coming tonight, a very big one. I would have to find a ride to my house. By the time I finally punched out, my emotions were haywire with a reckless sense of longing. I truly had to see her again. She was waiting for me. I could just feel it in each and every one of my eager bones. I had to see her. Now. I didn't even bother to ask anyone for a ride home. I just walked out of the building and started heading towards her house. I knew the route by heart. I didn't have a jacket or a hat, but I was warm. I must have been in love. I mean, what else could it have been? Surely it wasn't my button-up, short-sleeve shirt or my tie. I know it wasn't my khaki pants. I must have been in love. I had a warm sweater of love to keep me safe from the bitter, cold air of winter. I was not only warm, but elated at the same time. I was going to march all the way to her house so we could finally be together. My plan was perfect, much as she was. I guessed that it would take me 3 hours to get to her house, as she lived roughly 10.5 miles from work. With this in mind, I made long and firm strides in the hopes of minimizing the amount of time it would take me to reach her. While walking down Main Street in this fashion, I noticed a lot of the shops closing up for the night due to the approaching blizzard. One of these shops was the local florist. An idea sprang into my aroused mind. I couldn't show up at her house empty-handed. That just wouldn't be right. I needed a gift, one that would profess my love for her in material form. I needed a rose. I pushed the door open just as the florist was about to lock up. I startled the hell out of her. I grabbed the nearest rose I could find, threw some money down on the counter, and left in a hassle. I had a mission after all. I started power walking towards her house once again, hoping I would beat the storm there. Before making it too far, I felt a sharp pain in my hand. I looked down and saw droplets of blood splattered across the ground. It was the rose. I must have grabbed an uncut one, thorns and all. My palm was now bleeding profusely, but I kept walking. It was merely a wound, received while attending to affairs of the heart. I was focused on the bigger picture. I trudged through the harsh winds, my pace never wavering. I could tell the storm was coming. I was now maybe a quarter of the way there. It was then that I felt snow. It began falling at a swift and steady rate, making it almost impossible to see in front of me. Still, I pressed on. My love for this woman was insatiable and desirous. I needed her. I absolutely needed her. I walked and walked, feeling the sting of the snow on my bare face. After an hour or so, I noticed a mark on my arm. It was beginning to turn black. This was the onset of frostbite, I guessed. This in no way slowed me down. I still had my sweater of love keeping me warm every step of the way. I neither felt the chill in my arm, nor did I care about the risk to my health. I'd made up my mind, and it could not be altered, not by human or by the frozen forces of Mother Nature herself. My arm became blacker and blacker as I walked. My other arm started becoming discolored as well. I could only assume my face was, too. This did not bother me in the slightest. I only cared about the task at hand. As the gusts of the wind turned harsher, I clenched the rose harder in my now gray hand. I was determined, more so than I had ever been. Another long and treacherous hour, I finally arrived in her street. This was it. My love would finally be reciprocated. I could hardly contain my excitement as I made my way over to her house. Luckily, her husband wasn't home yet. The lawn was covered in snow, but I could still see the stone walkway leading to the front door. I took a step onto it, but quickly fell to the ground, slipping on a sheet of ice. I landed on my arm. I didn't feel anything, but I'm sure that I broke it as I couldn't move it one bit. I stood up and kept walking, calling out to her as I did. I hoped that she would hear my shrieks and come running out to see me. Just then, the front door of her house opened, and she walked out, proving my cries to be effective. She said nothing. She simply looked at me with the most frightened look I had ever seen. She raised her hand over her mouth in shock of what she was witnessing. I reached up and presented her the rose. My voice was tired from yelling her name, but I managed to offer a couple of words. For you. She stared at me for a second, just as she did earlier at work. Those eyes of disgust, that look of confusion, it was now turning into sheer terror. Love truly is a strange mistress. Before I could speak again, she began to scream. She screamed so loudly, in fact, that I felt a sharp pain in my ears. I could tell that she was terrified of me. I may have looked odd and disfigured, but my love for her remained intact. Why couldn't she see this? Why was she doing this to me? How could she? Rage began to overcome my emotions. I couldn't handle the unrequited mess that had just been thrown directly in front of me. I could now feel the bitter coldness of the storm. I was now aware of my frostbitten skin as well. The immense amount of emotional and physical pain I felt at this moment caused me to lash out at my one true love. Using my good arm, I took the rose, thorns and all, and started beating her with it. I slashed open every inch of beautiful skin that I could see. As the blood dripped from her defenseless body, she screamed once again. I kept slashing at her skin over and over again, but she wouldn't stop. The sound of her voice pierced through the cold night as well as my ears. With one last swipe, I sliced open her throat with the rose. She finally stopped. Her lifeless body fell to the snowy ground. I lay down with her, trying to provide her some warmth. She looked so faultless, so attractive. Her beauty was staggering even after death. I smiled, happy that she was no longer screaming, happy that I provided her with inner peace. She could now rest. We both could. I placed the bloody rose between us and let our bodies envelop it. I looked at my eyes once more before closing mine. Maybe now we could finally be together. Late one night, I found myself driving down what seemed like an endless stretch of road. I was on my way back from a week-long business trip, facing at least a 12-hour drive home. Having always been afraid of planes and heights in general, the monstrous trek was unavoidable. Though tedious and sometimes downright soul-crushing, I'd grown used to the lonely road trips back and forth from state to state. In an effort to minimize my time behind the wheel, I usually refrained from making pit stops. I would push through exhaustion and discomfort, making my way home in one fell swoop. I would then enter my bedroom and meet my blankets with a hard thud, falling asleep almost immediately after my head hit the pillow. Picturing my eventual slumber is what kept my foot on the gas pedal. On this drive, however, I grew particularly hungry. I tried to ignore the feeling, but this became increasingly difficult as the night went on. I found myself longing for sustenance, fantasizing about dreadful gas station food, anything that would placate my insatiable late-night hunger. I was between a rock and a hard place, as tightly squished as one could be. Unable to fight off the urge to eat any longer, I gave in to my stomach's groaning and got off the highway somewhere in Massachusetts. I had been to the state on several occasions, but this time I was in unfamiliar territory. There were many trees, more than the average Cape-side town. On top of that, there were no buildings in sight. Despite the lack of residential growth, I was sure I could sniff out a 7-Eleven and indulge in a microwave burrito or a slice of rubbery pizza. I drove down for what must have been 30 minutes or so. No gas stations, no fast food joints, no buildings of any kind. Just miles and miles of wooded area. Worst of all, I didn't even have a phone signal to pull up my GPS. I was just about to give up on Operation Midnight Snack when I saw a faint glow off in the distance. This signaled me that I must have been reaching the outskirts of civilization. Furthermore, intimate nourishment was just around the corner. As I approached the glimmering light, I realized it was that of a large neon sign. Coming closer, I was able to make out what it said. Supernova Diner, followed by an even larger subheading, open 25 hours a day. I guessed that they really wanted to drive home the "we never close" angle, and in a cheeky manner no less. Cheekier and larger still was a big flashing arrow beneath the sign, pointing to the diner in question. Hungry as ever, I pulled in without hesitation. I jumped out of my car and rushed towards the entrance, but not before taking a quick look at the place. It was a beautiful, retro-themed silver boxcar diner. The smooth metal exterior gleamed in the moonlight as I walked up. It was so sleek and well-crafted. I wondered why it was located in the middle of nowhere. Could they really get by on the odd passerby here and there? After admiring the diner's craftsmanship, I barged in, intent on satisfying my late-night case of the munchies. The diner was void of life, but I heard a voice yell out from the kitchen. "Be right there!" While I waited for service, I surveyed my surroundings. A gorgeous red checkerboard pattern painted the interior of the building. Lining the perimeter were red booths and tables, so immaculate they looked as though they'd never been touched by human hands. To top it all off, there was a row of similarly red, identical cushioned bar stools at the counter. The diner definitely had classic 50 vibes to it, but it was too crisp and clean to feel truly authentic. After a few minutes of waiting, a middle-aged man came out of the kitchen, drying his hands with a dish rag. "Hello there. Welcome to Supernova Diner. My name is Hank. I'll be your server tonight. How can I help you?" Hank wore a retro soda jerk cap and comically large bow tie, a spotless white apron, and a smile almost too wide for his face. He pointed up at the large menu on the wall behind him, where I noticed quirky food items like the Milky Way shake, Galaxy sliders, and Planet fries. "Yeah, I'll have whatever the special is." I didn't feel like asking him to translate the menu for me. Plus, I didn't really care what I was eating, so long as my stomach stopped growling. "The Nebula Express, coming right up." Hank shot me another awkwardly wide smile. To escape his glare, I pulled out my phone and took a look at the screen. Still no signal, but I noticed that it was approaching midnight. I groaned a bit, knowing that my detour had cost me a swift return home. Still, I knew I couldn't ignore my biological needs any longer. I would have ended up stopping at some point anyway. I put my phone in my pocket and looked back up to the counter. Hank was still there, smiling away. Shouldn't you be getting my order?" He didn't react to my query. Instead, he remained silent and motionless. "Okay, I'm just gonna leave now. Bye." Just as I turned around to head for the door, Hank spoke up. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Why's that?" I asked. "Well, it would be a waste of time." I turned back and glared at him. "What are you talking about? Are you going to go get my food or not?" He laughed at me. "You can't leave now. The fun is just about to begin. Your order is being prepared as we speak. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride." Hank pulled out a stopwatch from his apron. The digital readout appeared to be counting backwards from an hour. I didn't know if it was a restaurant gimmick or a strange prank at my expense, but either way, I was fed up. "Bye, Hank. It's been weird. Thanks for nothing." I turned around and continued marching towards the exit. As I did this, my jaw dropped, and the door was gone. My eyes quickly darted from left to right, revealing to me that the windows had vanished as well. There was nothing but continuous wall on either side of me. Perplexed, I looked back to Hank. He chuckled to himself, then asked me a question. "So, how do you like your meat?" "What?" I asked, completely dazed. "Your meat, how do you like it?" Well done. I like it well done." "Well done, huh?" "I like my meat as red as possible. A little color does the body good." "Hank, where's the door?" "Well, let's just say it's temporarily unavailable. Anything else I can help you with?" "Yeah. What the hell is going on here?" "Well, there are a number of possibilities. I've outlined them here on the menu." Hank pointed up at the menu again, only this time the food items were gone. The letters had seemingly been rearranged to form bullet points numbered 1 to 3. I read them aloud. 1. During your business trip, one of your colleagues slipped you some LSD as part of a half-hearted practical joke. What you're experiencing is now a product of the drug's potent hallucinogenic properties. "I like that one," Hank said. "Unlikely, but it's fun, wouldn't you say?" I moved on to the next possibility. 2. You fell asleep at the wheel. This is merely a vivid dream that will continue until you inevitably crash your car and die on impact. Alternatively, you may have already crashed your car and lived, albeit barely. You are currently in a coma, and your sleeping mind has formed a narrative based on the hunger you felt before the accident. The diner is a metaphor for the coma itself, and you won't escape until you're awakened, which may very well be never. Hank bore a look of concern. A little morbid, I admit, but it is possible. I reluctantly looked at the last option. 3. Something supernatural is afoot. Mysterious forces beyond your comprehension are at play, trapping you in an otherwise normal eatery. These forces will not let you leave under any circumstances. The best thing you can do is accept this and allow yourself to succumb to whatever classic paranormal tropes are thrown your way. Death will be your only escape. That's all I could come up with, Hank said. I'm not sure myself, but I'm leaning towards number 3. What the hell, Hank? What the fuck is this? And shouldn't you, of all people, know? You would think so, wouldn't you? But I guess I wouldn't tell you if I did, now would I? He offered me another one of his smiles as a consolation. I wanted to punch it clean off of his face. Instead, I partook in a nervous breakdown of sorts. I slammed my body against the wall where the door used to be. I screamed at the top of my lungs and even grabbed each and every one of the bar stools and tossed them in different directions as hard as my arms would allow. All the while, Hank remained calm and still, his lips stretched from ear to ear. Just as I was about to take a swing at him, the kitchen door behind him popped open. "Oh, your order must be ready. Please come with me." Hank disappeared into the darkness beyond the kitchen's doorframe. I stayed behind, hesitant to follow him. After a few moments, I heard him call out to me. "Come on, kid. Aren't you hungry?" It's true, I was hungry, but I was more so cautious, especially given my peculiar situation. Because of this, I sat down in one of the booths and waited. I don't know what I was waiting for exactly, but it was all I could bring myself to do at that very moment. It wasn't long before I heard Hank's voice again. "You can't wait out there forever, kid." As if in response to his statement, the lights in the diner began to flicker. Then, one by one, they went out, spreading darkness from booth to booth. Eventually, I was just left with one bulb above me, wavering in and out of life. It provided me with just enough light to make my way to the kitchen, and Hank knew it. I had 2 options. Go to the dark kitchen or let the bulb go out and sit in the dark diner. Neither one was ideal, but deep down I knew only one had potential to lead me to answers, no matter which one of the far-fetched scenarios on the menu was true. As such, I gave into the narrative that was unfolding around me. It was clear to me at this point that fighting it was futile. As I passed the threshold into the kitchen, the door shut itself behind me. A bright light poured out from the ceiling, washing over the entire room, revealing vibrant white walls and flooring. In the center of the room was a chair, slanted in a diagonal position, not unlike one you'd find in a dentist's office. Next to the chair was Hank, who had seemingly traded in his diner uniform for a flashy white lab coat. "Finally! Come in, sit down. Take a load off." If only I had a fear for what might have happened next if I disobeyed, I did as Hank told me. It's not like I had much of a choice at that point. I slowly walked over to the chair and lay down. As I did this, leather straps wrapped themselves around my legs, arms, and forehead. I no longer had the luxury of movement or peripheral vision. Hank walked around to the front of the chair and pulled out his stopwatch. "You're doing just fine, kid. Only 4 minutes left." Without warning, 6 or 7 shadowy figures came rushing from either side of me. They brought with them rolling carts filled with what looked like medical equipment and power tools. I tried to make out even a single face in the crowd, but I couldn't. They lacked discernible features of any kind and moved about in perfect harmony with one another, like animated silhouettes doing the bidding of some unseen higher power. Over the course of the next few minutes, the figures poked and prodded me, drew blood, took hair samples, and inserted their utensils in places I'd rather not discuss. As much as I squirmed and screamed, none of them reacted, not even Hank. Feeling helpless, I eventually stopped struggling and simply braced myself for each needle that penetrated my skin. They made things a little more tolerable. After a while, the figures stopped. Instead of going away like I'd hoped they would, they traded their needles and test tubes for surgical scissors and began cutting my clothes off of me. This continued until I was completely naked. I tried talking with Hank, but he was too busy playing around with some samples that had been collected. Even if he did respond, No amount of encouragement could have prepared me for what happened next. Using nothing but scalpels and brute strength, the figures began cutting away at my skin. It was an absolutely horrific orchestra of deadly incisions, and one that continued until they peeled off every last bit of my epidermis. For one reason or another, I remained both alive and awake during the entire ordeal, though at the time, I wished I could have died. The pain was excruciating, and it came in waves. Just when I thought I was going numb, another unbearable, sharp, throbbing sensation would overtake my entire body. I'd never felt anything like it before. By the end of it, my ears were ringing from the volume of my own screams. "There's that color," Hank exclaimed, gazing at the bloody mess that I'd become. "Why are you doing this?" I yelled. "I'm not doing anything, kid. I'm just here to observe. Relax. Only 27 minutes left." I would have argued with him further, but the figures grabbed the power tools and started tearing through my muscle tissue. The buzzing sound of saws filled the room, drowning out my cries of agony. Through blood-soaked eyes, I could see Hank mouthing the words, tick-tock, tick-tock, over and over again. I watched him mock me until the buzzing stopped and the next stage of torture commenced. I never wanted to see my organs. I never wanted to see my bone. I could have gone my whole life without knowing what they looked like. Now I can't get the image out of my head. I'm afraid I never will. After successfully ripping apart my skin and muscles, the shadowy demons took hammers to my insides, smashing up my spleen, stomach, liver, kidney, and lungs. They broke through the brittle, white ivory that made up my skeleton, making sure to leave no bone unturned. They even destroyed my skull and scooped out my brain matter into jars. After all was said and done, they cleaned up my remains like fallen hair in a barber shop and swiftly left the room. But how did I live? I'm not entirely sure. They stripped apart every physical aspect of my being, but I was still there, a sort of bubble of floating consciousness. I could still see and hear, but I was without a material body. As jarring as that may sound, I was just happy to no longer be in pain. I didn't realize it, but Hank was still in the room. He walked over to me and leaned in real close, stopwatch in hand. "See, now that wasn't so hard, was it? And look here, you've only got 18 minutes left. How will you spend it? What things will you see?" "Well, there's only one way to find out." Hank turned around and walked out the kitchen door, leaving me alone in the white room. Within an instant, things began to change around me. The walls, floor, and ceiling faded, revealing an array of distant stars behind them. I somehow went from being in a diner on planet Earth to floating around in a vacuum of space within mere moments. Within seconds of the room completely fading from view, I was unwillingly hurled into the universe at light speed. Everything around me blurred, and my bodiless soul spun around uncontrollably. If I still had a stomach, it would have been turning. I'll never forget what I went through in those coming moments, but I'll also never fully remember either. I wish I could tell you exactly what I experienced, but being a floating orb of pure consciousness is like being in a dream. The details of what happened are very fuzzy. In truth, I can only tell you how I felt, because that will never go away. As I traveled through deep space, I was stopped in specific locations, mostly foreign planets and dead solar systems. When stopped, I saw unspeakable things, gruesome things, things I never knew could exist in the universe. I was plagued with disturbing sights and concepts of incomprehensible proportions, so horrific in fact that it made what the shadowy figures had done to me look tame in comparison. I don't remember exactly what I saw out there, but I feel an immense dread whenever I try to recall it. After what felt like an eternity of torture, I was eventually transported to what I can only assume was a location outside of the observable universe. There were no stars, or any light to speak of. not even off in the distance. I was alone in a blanket of darkness, left to suffer with the memories of what I had endured. Just as I was beginning to accept my circumstances, a light glow appeared in the distance. As it came close to my position, I recognized its features. It was Hank's stopwatch. The readout was approaching 0. 10, 9, 8. I started to feel weary, almost like I was falling into a deep sleep. Was that even possible in my current state? 7, 6, 5. Like a projected movie, the last hour of my life appeared on the black canvas of space behind the stopwatch. It played in reverse at high speed like a VHS stuck on rewind. 4, 3, 2. Feeling faint, I tried to focus on the pseudo-projection. I relived everything that happened to me in the diner within just a few seconds. 1, 0, and poof. Just like that, I was back in the diner parking lot, body and flesh intact. My car was there next to me, right where I'd parked it. I took out my phone and checked the time. It was 12:01. Everything had returned to normal somehow, to the way it was before. Elated, I jumped in my car and started it up. I was about to drive off like a bat out of hell, but I decided to take one last look at the diner. Somehow, within its walls, there does exist an extra hour in the day. How that's possible and what its purpose is, I can't be certain. Maybe Hank was right and option 3 had something to do with it. The only thing I do know is that I survived and I won't be making another pit stop anytime soon, no matter how hungry I may be. Just then, before my very eyes, the diner lifted itself from the foundation and flew upwards into the night sky.